The Civil War may have ended over 150 years ago, but the stories of its most infamous Confederate generals are far from over. What happened to these men after the smoke cleared and the cannons fell silent? From battlefield glory to heartbreaking tragedy, from political power plays to dark controversies, their post-war lives reveal a side of history rarely told. Join me as we unravel the fascinating journeys of Confederate leaders like Stonewall Jackson, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and Joseph E. Johnston, men whose legacies are as complex as the war they fought. You'll discover shocking secrets, unexpected friendships, and the lasting impact they left on America's turbulent Reconstruction era. Stay with me until the very end, because the truth behind their triumphs and tragedies will surprise you and challenge everything you thought you knew about the Civil War's most notorious figures. The Confederate States of America was a seceded nation led by many influential and capable families. Jefferson Davis was confined with a guard present in his room at all times and was provided only a Bible for reading, while others went on to have prosperous careers following the war. Below are some of the most notable accounts. Due to widespread public protest, his treatment was gradually eased, and by September 1866, Davis resided in a 4-bedroom apartment alongside his wife, Verena. In Washington, Georgia, he formally disbanded the Confederate States of America and was held prisoner in a casemate, compelled to wear shackles and denied any contact with the outside world, including his family. Jefferson Davis was the sole president of the Confederacy. He and his cabinet escaped southward by train, unsuccessfully trying to gather an army during their retreat. Davis was incarcerated at Fort Monroe, Virginia, where he initially suffered harsh conditions. Later, he was transferred to Quebec. His children had relocated to Quebec after his arrest, and Verena joined them there. Davis served as president from 1861 until 1865. At the close of March 1865, Union troops broke Confederate defenses, forcing the abandonment of Richmond, the Confederate capital. After the conflict, some leaders faced prosecution or public disgrace. Davis was unanimously elected by delegates from all Confederate states. The U.S. government intended to prosecute him, but was uncertain on what grounds. They debated charging him with Lincoln's assassination or the mistreatment of Union prisoners at Andersonville, but lacked sufficient proof connecting Davis to these crimes. Ultimately, he was indicted for treason, though his lawyer contended that Davis could not have committed treason since Mississippi had seceded and was no longer part of the Union. Davis moved south to Irwinville, where Union forces captured him while he camped nearby. In 1867, Davis was released on bail but endured severe hardships. He later joined his children in the North. He stayed in Quebec for a year, but returned to the United States after Johnson's Christmas 1868 proclamation pardoned everyone involved in the rebellion. Upon returning, Davis was very poor. However, he was selective about the jobs he accepted. He declined offers from Randolph-Macon College and the University of the South because he didn't want to harm their reputations and because the salaries were too low. In 1869, Davis traveled to Britain and France, but was unable to find employment there as well. He received many invitations to speak at various events, but refused most. He did deliver the eulogy at Robert E. Lee's funeral. When Verena passed away in 1906, she was laid to rest beside him. Alexander H. Stephens served as Vice President of the Confederate States from 1861 to 1865. His career after the Civil War was far more successful than Davis's. Stephens was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1866, but was prevented from taking his seat due to restrictions placed on former Confederate officials. In November 1882, Stephens was elected governor of Georgia, but died just 4 months into office. He was also elected to the House of Representatives and won re-election in 1874, 1876, 1878, and 1880. Robert E. Lee, often known simply as General Lee, is widely regarded as the most iconic figure of the Confederacy. He was the Confederacy's finest general and by war's end held the title of General-in-Chief of Confederate Armies. After surrendering, Lee was not arrested and his only punishments were temporary. Union forces arrested him for treason at his home on May 11, 1865. He spent 5 months in prison and was released in October 1865. In 1870, Davis became president of the Carolina Life Insurance Company, but resigned due to restrictions on former Confederates. He then authored a book on Davis's policies. Dorsey died 2 years later, leaving her home to Davis. He lived there until his death in 1889 while vacationing in Louisiana. Over 200,000 people attended his funeral, and he was buried in Richmond, Virginia. Though Stevens held office, he opposed secession throughout the war and frequently criticized it to halt the fighting. At war's end, Stevens did not flee, but lost voting rights and some property. The Panic of 1873 affected him financially. He worked various small jobs until 1877, when he moved into Sarah Dorsey's Mississippi home to write his memoirs. His residence was eventually converted into Arlington Cemetery. In 1866, Lee urged the remaining Confederate soldiers to surrender, and throughout his later years promoted reconciliation rather than harboring resentment toward the North. He supported free public education for African Americans, but opposed the 15th Amendment. Initially, Lee had planned to retire on his farm, but because of his fame, this was not feasible. So he accepted a position as president of Washington College. In an effort to promote reconciliation, Lee welcomed many Northerners to Washington College and made sure they were treated kindly by Southern students. He even met with his former adversary, General Beauregard. General Beauregard led Confederate forces at the Battle of Fort Sumter, which ignited the Civil War and played significant roles in many key battles, including the First Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Shiloh. After the war, Beauregard reluctantly swore loyalty to the United States. Initially indifferent to politics, he entered the political arena on September 28, 1870. After President Grant pardoned him, he collaborated with black politicians to support African American rights, aiming to remove radical Republicans who obstructed Reconstruction in Louisiana. Beauregard also introduced cable cars to New Orleans and later made a fortune promoting the Louisiana Lottery after leaving the railroad business. P.G.T. Beauregard was arguably the most prominent Confederate general, aside from Joseph E. Johnston. Johnston was a senior Civil War commander whose successes were often overshadowed, partly due to his strained relationship with President Davis. At war's end, Johnston commanded a large force, and Union generals Grant and Sherman commended his battlefield leadership. Beauregard held various jobs until his death in his sleep in 1893. He was interred in Lexington, Virginia, on Washington College grounds. 5 years after the war's conclusion, Lee suffered a stroke and died 2 weeks later. Generals Johnston, Sherman, and Grant remained close friends throughout their lives. After the war, Johnston worked as an executive in the railroad and insurance industries, and eventually served 1 term in the House of Representatives. He died of pneumonia just 10 days after attending General Sherman's funeral in heavy rain. Forrest joined the Confederate cause out of deep passion. He was a highly skilled cavalry officer and is infamously known for massacring hundreds of surrendered soldiers, many of whom were African American, at the Battle of Fort Pillow. 2 years after the war, Forrest became the Grand Wizard of a new white supremacist group, the Ku Klux Klan. During the late 1860s, the KKK suppressed black voting by intimidating African American voters at polling places and used violence to deter potential voters. Disillusioned by the Klan's violence and poor organization, Forrest left the group. Despite ongoing lynchings and violence, he entered politics, advocating for black rights and demanding strict penalties for white offenders who committed violent crimes against African Americans. Stonewall Jackson is the sole individual on this list who died during the war. He was General Lee's trusted lieutenant and one of the Confederacy's most successful generals. Jackson became famous during the Civil War, especially for Pickett's charge, a brutal assault at the Battle of Gettysburg led by General Pickett. Jackson was taken to a nearby plantation for treatment after being wounded, but died 8 days later. Alongside Jackson, several of his advisors, soldiers, and horses also perished in the incident. His death was unusual. Upon returning to camp on May 2, 1863, Jackson and his men were mistakenly fired upon by their own troops, who believed Union cavalry was attacking. After Jackson ordered his men to hold fire, Major Berry declared, "It's a damned Yankee trick, fire," and Confederate soldiers mistakenly fired on Jackson again. George Pickett, often seen as reckless and hot-headed, fled to Canada after the war to avoid prosecution. After General Grant convinced him to return to Virginia, Pickett tried to rejoin the army, but was refused. He then took up farming, and later worked for an insurance company. Pickett died in 1875 at age 50. Forrest passed away at his Tennessee home in 1877 from diabetes complications. The lives of these Confederate generals after the war are a powerful reminder that history is never just black and white. It's filled with triumphs, tragedies, and controversies that continue to shape our world today. But what do you think? Were these men heroes, villains, or something far more complicated? How should we remember their legacies in a modern America still wrestling with its past? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your take. And if you found this journey into history as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that challenges what you think you know. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the stories of the past alive.